Hi, Riley. I'm so excited to have you on my podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jody.
Yeah, it's going to be so fun. Well, you wrote an amazing book. It's called 3 Seconds of Courage. And I can't wait to highlight it and talk about how to get to that courageous step when you have fear in your life. But before we get there, I want you to share your story because, first of all, the stories in your book are so powerful. But this first story
Mm.
just, oh my goodness, I know there's a lot of trauma attached to it, but there was also this beautiful way God saved your family in the middle of it. So if you can just tell us the story that you share in the opening of the book when you were 10 years old.
Yeah, so I was a little girl. My family takes a holiday to an island off the coast of Thailand. And growing up, my family loved travel and we did a lot of missions work. And so prior to this holiday, we'd been in Thailand working in an orphanage that rescued children from the sex trade. And so we jump on this boat to go to this holiday and just relax and hang out with it was my mom's side of my mom's extended side of the family that we were meeting. So we jump on this boat, we pull up to this absolute beautiful island. It had palm trees everywhere, flat in the middle, two big cliffs on either side. And this is a few days before Christmas, and we go spend our days snorkeling, going on boat trips. But then the day after Christmas, that is when everything changed. And I woke up suddenly in the morning to an earthquake. At the time, I thought my little sister was pulling a prank and was under my bed shaking it. And I jump out of the bed thinking she's hiding under my bed. And I realized, oh, she's not there. And the whole ground is shaking beneath me. It was a 9.1 magnitude earthquake. Things are falling off the walls. I rush into my parents' room. I'm like, what's going on? My mom's like, it's the earthquake. Don't worry. And the moment she says that, the earthquake stops. And so we call the reception to figure out if there's another earthquake expected to come. We were told it's not. So we carry on with our day thinking, okay, that was just an unexpected event, but not really thinking too much of it. Flash forward to the middle of the morning. My sisters and I are building sandcastles on the beach, and my dad walks up to us and he tells us it's time to go back to our room. And I mean, I can't tell my story without telling all the just God moments in our story, the
Yes.
coincidences, these small miracles that God was just involved in. Um, and one of them was that we had booked beachfront bungalows, and when we showed up at the island, and these are they're nothing fancy, but they were right on the front of the beach. And when we got in there a few days prior, they had accidentally double booked us and instead gave us middle of the island concrete apartment top floor rooms. And so here we are. My dad, he's like, "Hey girls, we need to go back to our room." So we start walking back to our room. And then I noticed something really odd. All the animals. So this is an island with tons of wildlife. And all of a sudden, all the animals go quiet. And
Wow.
wild dogs howl as if they've been hurt and run into the forest. Monkeys start climbing up the cliffs. Birds suddenly fly up in the air and leave the island, and animals with their sixth sense know something is coming, and you could just feel it because only you go from this loud noise to all of a sudden the only thing you can hear is human voices. And so we keep walking back, and I just noticed it, and then all of a sudden a few seconds later I hear screams and shouts, and we're almost at our room in the middle of the island, but it's so small so you can we look back, and I look through the palm trees to the beach, and people are running into each other, and it's a scene of absolute chaos. And I'm thinking, what is going on? And then I noticed the oddest thing: all the water around the island had left, and it had left so
Wow.
quickly that there's fish flying around everywhere. The boats are now stuck on the sand. People who are snorkeling are now on reef, and there on the horizon is this thin white line. And it's this white line that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger by the second. And I look to my dad and I'm like, "Where's mom? We don't know where our mom is in this moment." And my mom had been on the phone in the reception, and she sees this water receding and instantly knows what's happening. Runs to the place where our sandcastles are. There she is, this mom desperately looking for her children, knowing she only has a few minutes to get to high ground. And she's standing there at the sandcastles, and she cries out to the Lord. She's like, "Lord, where are they?" And she hears this one word: flee. And so she turns around and starts running back to where our rooms were. And I remember seeing my mom running towards me, fear in her eyes. Here's this confident, strong woman. I knew the look in her eyes, something wrong is about to happen, something wrong is happening. And I remember looking over to this lady, and she was frozen in her lounge chair. Next to her is a baby crying. And that mom and that baby I never saw again. And so my family, my dad grabs one. I have two younger sisters, so my dad grabs one sister, my mom grabs the other sister, and I as the eldest start running behind them. And then we get to the other side of the island, and we're just trying to find as quickly as we can a path up to safety, a path up as quickly as we can. And now we see that this thin white line is an over 50-foot tsunami, and it's coming at our island at a rapid speed. And
Wow.
I saw this sight that I like that no one should ever see. I just remember seeing this man on a boat and the tsunami just consumed him. And it was at that moment where I realized like our lives are hanging on by a thread. And so we start running up this pathway, which again, another coincidence. My mom and I got lost the day before and found a pathway up one of the cliffs. We start running up this pathway and we're running as fast as we can. And there's this moment where I'm trying to keep up with my parents, a sweat dripping down my back. I feel so much fear. I still don't fully understand what's going on, but I just watched a man's life be taken from him. And I look behind me and I just watch as this tsunami, this huge wall of water is just obliterating and just taking and destroying everything in its path. It's you look back as we're running up this pathway and there's this tsunami just taking down buildings and taking people's lives. Uh, and in this moment, I just remember like wanting just to stop. And I hear my father, and he's like, Riley, you run. And so I turn around and I just focus on the voice of my father. And by the grace of God, even though there was a moment as we're running up this pathway that the tsunami was less than a car's distance from us, by the grace of God, we managed to run high enough that the tsunami didn't reach us. And we ran to this grassy patch at the top of the cliff. And I just remember falling down to my knees and crying out to God.
Mm.
And here I am, this like 10-year-old little girl that so much death and devastation is happening around her. And yet I just felt the presence of God like I never had before. Like
Wow.
I just was on my knees and I felt like almost as if someone had wrapped like a warm blanket around me. Like I just felt
Mm.
this peace that the Lord promises that transcends all understanding, that doesn't make sense. And yet here's God meeting this little girl in this horrible moment. And it was just it's that peace that I've clung on to ever since.
I just love that. I love that you felt the presence of God. And I remember when I read the book, just thinking like each of those things that God had kind of helped work out ahead of time, like you and your mom
Yeah.
getting lost and already knew where the path was. And I think in the book, she was saying, like, help me find the path where we were yesterday. It's just, I can see like God knew you guys were going to need to get to higher ground. So the day before you get lost and you find it, and you had no idea that that was going to be part of what saved your life the day of the tsunami. And then just all the little details of you getting up and leaving right away with the sandcastle, not being down in the water. I think you said like hours before
Mm,
you guys were snorkeling, and if you had been there where you were 2 or 3 hours before, there's no way you would have made it. So I just see God's fingerprints in His hand over all of the details
mm,
for your family to survive. And it's just, I mean, it was a captivating story. I could not put the book down during that. You say it so beautifully, but you also paint the disaster happening around you. And I can only imagine the fear that you're experiencing as a 10-year old. I mean, even as an adult, there would be fear, right? But as a 10-year old. And
mm,
so your book is all about overcoming that fear and turning it to courage. And so you have a section called Courage versus Fear. And you have a lot of great quotes. I had a hardest time just picking my favorites, but I just want to read this one. It says, we are most often not in control of the hardships that hit our lives, but we are responsible for the way we respond. You go on and say we can cower in fear or we can choose to rise up. And so I know that there were many steps to this for you as you came back and worked through things. But let's say someone's listening right now and they're in that step, that phase of fear right now, whatever it is that's holding them
mm,
back. And how would you encourage them to move to courage? What did you do practically? Like, can you give some
mm.
tips?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, the first thing I want to say is like the Lord has so much empathy on us. Like I
Mm.
just experienced that over and over again is like the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And like when we read the Bible, I think of the story of Lazarus and he dies and Jesus weeps. Like he cries out, like here's the Lord crying out and weeping. But then the next day he raises him back to life. And it's like that's who our God is. Like he joins us in our pain. He joins us in our suffering. And he has so much empathy on our fear and why we fear. And like he walks this earth. He knows what we experience. And so the first thing is just to know, like, the Lord does not shame you. Like, shame and love cannot coexist.
That's good.
And so I would just encourage you, one, like, run to the Father. Like, in order to look away from the fear, we have to look to something else. And the best thing to look to is the Father. And so the practically, like, what does it look like to like know that you're experiencing fear, whether it's like social anxiety or depression or whatever it may be, or like fear of rejection or fear of failure. One, I want you to encourage you to like identify it with the Lord, like name it. And that's because like so often like the devil loves to work in the darkness. And so we have to
Mm.
bring things into the light. And and so for me, that looked like I was really thankful that I had when I was 10 years old, I wasn't fully able to understand what was the fear that I was experiencing. And so that's when my parents stepped in. And so when we came back from having survived the tsunami, I was terrified of the ocean. And my parents, after the tsunami, enrolled my sisters and I in beach lifeguard training. And that is the
Mm.
opposite of what I wanted to do. But
Right.
the reason they chose to do that is because they saw this fear within me. They named the fear within me. But I know that so many of our listeners right now are older and have the ability and are empowered within themselves to be the ones that are like my parents in my story. And so they put me in beach lifeguard training because they wanted to teach me like the more that you face your fears, the less power fear has over you. And
Mm.
like fear wants us to believe that we are alone and that we like can't do what it's saying. Like it just it's so filled with so many lies. And so my parents wanted me to like turn and face it, and have the courage to overcome it. And I remember on the first day of training, I'm terrified. I just had a nightmare. I'm like, just like also wrestling, like, why are my parents forcing me to do this? And my dad like gets down on his knees, and I have one of the most important moments of my life. He looks me in the eye and he's like,
Mm.
Riley, like you are fighting a battle between courage and fear, and all you need is a little more courage. And so I just would encourage people like face your fears. Um, but there's also, I think it's also important to note that there is a difference between, in my book, I talk about the difference between helping and hindering fears.
Yeah.
And the reality is that there are some fears that we have that are actually God given. Like, well, one, there's just like the fear of God, which is a great fear to have. It
Yes.
leads to wisdom and it's a great way for us to live our lives. But two, there's like the safeguard fear, like the fear that's saying, hey, don't walk down that dark alleyway right now and it's like midnight. That's a good fear. Like that's your protector. But then what I'm talking about, what I'm wanting you to face and name and overcome is the hindering fears. And these are the fears that are trying to oppose our calling, that are trying to oppose the giftings in our lives from being seen by the world. And you know, for me, it was the fear of the ocean, but later on it was like fear of man. And this, I share the story in my book of lying to a friend because I was so like I just desperately wanted to be have a friend, but I was really underneath that was just like a fear of man and a fear of rejection. And so like face these fears, name them, and then ask the Lord to help you with them because it's the Spirit of God that's going to give you the strength. Like, go to the Lord, journal, be honest with Him at how you're really feeling, and ask for His strength. And then also welcome people into it. That's why I talk so much in the book about like courage cheerleaders because we have to like have people that are supporting us and encouraging us. We get to be courage cheerleaders for other people, but we need those people that we can like that can help us when it feels like our fear is too much.
Oh my gosh, you said so much goodness in that statement. So first, I just love that your parents did that. I think I'd be scared to do that for my kids because I think, oh my gosh, this is where they have the fear. But you're right, they have to face it. And now you are like, love the ocean. That's like your favorite place to be, right? And you
Yes.
surf and you I mean and think about it, like that is crazy because you went through like the most terrifying experience in the ocean and now it's your favorite. So I love that your parents helped you face that fear. I love what your dad said.
Mm,
I actually wrote that quote down because you say it a couple times in the book what your dad said to you and it was just powerful that either courage or fear will exist in your life and you get to choose which one wins. It's like, you know what, that's really
mm,
beautiful. And I do think it's important to identify which fear is helpful and which fear is not, which is hindering you, because God's given you a calling and a
mm,
purpose. And sometimes you have these fears that are not helping you, right? They're holding you back. So name them. I think that's so good. You talk about naming your emotions. And as someone who walked through many years of her life really not knowing how to identify her emotions, I love that you
Mm,
identified this in your book because sometimes this has to do with our fears that we don't even know how to name what we're feeling and let alone, our emotions. And so when you got back from the tsunami, you felt like people wanted you to only tell the good part of the story and that there was this deep sadness you had experienced as you watched people pass away, like the man in the boat, right? Like that image is,
mm,
and there that brings sadness and also probably some trauma and things. So, but you kind of like push that aside and would just kind of share the
mhm,
good start parts of the story, which is not a bad thing, but you have to eventually let yourself feel those hard emotions, right? The disappointment,
mm,
the sadness, the all of that. And so I'm sure that I know it was a process working through it in the book you shared, but I know for some people this is really hard. So you have something, I love this part in the book where again, I don't know if you have your book near you, but it was on page 61. Do you have your book near you by chance?
I don't.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going to go ahead and read it because it's
Yeah,
so
you
good.
read
But
it.
you talk about these questions to ask to help you identify your fears. So it says, what am I feeling right now? Why am I feeling sad, lonely, angry, or worried? Where in my body am I holding stress? I felt like that was so good. Do I feel the tension in my shoulder, back, gut, so on? Are there lies
Mm,
I'm believing about myself or others? Pray and ask God what the truth is. Is what I'm feeling helping me or hurting me? Kind of like the fear question you asked. And what is God calling me to do with the emotions I'm feeling? And I just thought those were really powerful because sometimes I think there's an emotion connected to the fear. Do you agree with that? That they kind of go hand in hand?
yeah, totally. Yeah, 100%. And the reason all of this conversation is so important is because you can't heal what you don't reveal. And like misnamed
Mm.
emotions so often come out in unhealthy ways. And that's I've seen it in my life, I've seen it in other people's life. I later on talk about my time of at my master's program, I had to go and attend 12-step programs, which is the one I went to was Alcohol Anonymous. And just knowing like we have to bring these emotions and understand them and we carry them in our bodies. And so like this is you and I are both so passionate about this, but like
Yes.
we're like working through your emotions, naming them, experiencing them, and not putting them because I saw in my own life like me trying to act joyful all the time ultimately wasn't serving me. And I had to have
Mm.
these it was in multiple different phases, but like I had to have these safe places where I could bring these emotions and name them and realize like, hey, Riley, you're still lovable even when you're sad. You're still likable and people still want to like be with you even when you're experiencing grief.
Yeah, so good. Oh, those stories where you shared, but people opened up and shared in the vulnerability. I love that. I think that was in the chapter on vulnerability, but it's like, I think we think if we're going to be vulnerable, people are going to be like, whoa, I can't take what you're saying. But it actually does the
Mm-hmm.
opposite. When you're vulnerable, it connects, right? It's just this beautiful way people go deeper. Like, I love, again, the podcast is called Depth. I love to go deeper. And I think vulnerability is key. And you actually talk about two rivals to vulnerability in your book. I'd love for you to share those and how they keep us from courage.
Yeah, so the two rivals is comfort and pride. And like so often in my story, I saw moments when I like just didn't want to share with people that I was feeling something because I was like, what are they gonna think of me? Are they gonna change their opinion of me? And that was just pride coming up. And then the other part is it's so much more like I think about how often someone's like, oh, how are you? And I'm like, I'm great, but I'm really not great. But it's just like so much more comforting and like easier just to not be honest. But we are called to like ask for help and like truly people connect more with your vulnerability than they do with your ability. And I think of
Mm.
like one of the experts of vulnerability is Brene Brown, but she talks about so
Yes.
often how like vulnerability is the one of the greatest measurements of courage. When we're willing to step out in our lives and take off the mask and take off the what we're trying to like control people's opinion of what they think of us and just come like naked and unashamed and emotionally. And I like even think about the life of Jesus, like when his most powerful moment was on the cross, and yet that is his most vulnerable moment. And
Mm.
they're like our vulnerability is our strength. And that's why when you read the Psalms, there's so much of David crying out to the Lord, and he's and what this is called is called Lament, but like he's just being so vulnerable. He's like, Lord, have you abandoned me? And like sometimes I'm like, wow, I can't believe you said that to the Lord. But like God's not gonna run away. He wants our
Right.
vulnerability, and so do people.
That's so good. Yeah. And the Psalms, I love them because they give us examples of what we can do. Because we have these emotions, we have these feelings, we're feeling it all, right? The negativeness, whether it's loneliness or whatever it is. And so, yeah, we have these examples of how we can say it to the Lord. And I loved what you had to say about vulnerability. And I do think that's what we can do to help others because I feel like we go through what we go through so we can help others go through what we went through. That's a quote from one of my dear friends, Kathy Wenenberg. And I feel like that's what we're
So
supposed to do
good.
is take, isn't that good? So we're supposed to take what we went through and then go and help someone. And that's what you talk about. You said the most fulfilling way to apply courage is toward the care and consideration of others, to take what we've been through and then go and courageously love people. And oh my goodness, the stories in your book are amazing of how you've done this. I loved the beginning of your book
Mm,
when you shared, and then I just kept reading and I thought, oh, there's just so much more goodness because you have many stories where you did this. And I'm going to share my favorite, but I thought I'd start with you sharing your favorite. Did you have a favorite story of this where you went and helped others? I mean, you have so many in the
mm.
book.
Oh, that's such a great question. Um, I think one of the moments I think about is after I got off the stage of doing my TED talk, and that young girl like ran up to me and she was like, I, she was like, I've experienced so many similar fears, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And it was just, I remember flash forward like years prior to this, my spiritual mentor just encouraging me, like, Riley, there's young girls behind you that need to know like how to how what is the way forward. And that's the reality, is like we don't just overcome our fears and just live a courageous life for our own benefit. Like us doing that is good for us, but it's even greater for the kingdom. And
Mm-hmm.
there's young people behind you, or even people that are older than you, that need you to show them the pathway forward. And this is kind of a random analogy, but I remember as a kid growing up in New Zealand on a farm, we had deer. And these deer, we put them in a paddock in a field with a fence that was 3 feet. And the deer never jumped out, but the deer were capable of jumping 6, 8 feet high fences. And that's because no deer jumped the fence, but they were capable of double what the fence was. And like we have to be the deer, like the fence jumpers in our lives, so that we
I
show
love that.
other people like it's possible. And so that moment of that young girl coming up to me, it was like a full circle moment of like, thank you, Jesus, that you were my strength and that you showed me how to do this. Because even if one, like the Lord leaves the 99 for the one, and so often our measurement of success, God is asking us to be defined by the one. And so I was just
Mm.
like, had that moment and was like, thank you, God, that I did the hard work to face my fears, and so that I could teach others how to do it too.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to get back to the one because you talk about, you have like a saying that you say, find the one. But before we get to that, I want to share the story. Well, actually, I'm going to let you share it. I'm going to kind of lead into it and you can tell the story. There were so many powerful stories, but you share this one about driving home. And you usually were going to go out and hang out, but instead, God put on your heart to drive straight home. And as you're driving home, you saw a man sitting on a bridge and you walk. First of all, it's very courageous to go over and sit down next to this person. And this person was suicidal. They was ready to take his life. And you felt like God was telling you to go and be with him. Can you kind of tell the story? It's fascinating and what God tugged on your heart to say and just how you helped him because he did not end up
Yeah.
killing himself. You saved his life.
Yeah, so he was this young boy, probably 16 years old, and he was sitting on the edge of the bridge, ready to jump off, and kept telling me like, "I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna kill myself." And I had watched a video from this man named Kevin Briggs, who would walk. He was a policeman, and now it's so cool because now he's like a dear friend of mine. But I watched this video about how he was a policeman during the day, but during the nighttime he would go and walk up and down the Golden Gate Bridge to try to find people who were trying to jump off. And he said you have to make sure people don't, like, the thing to do is to make sure people don't feel alone. And so the what I thought in my mind was like, I'm gonna join this young boy on the bridge. So I climb up and I sit next to this young man. And as I'm talking to him, he's just like almost kept having moments where he's almost about to jump off. And I kept hearing the Lord as I'm praying say, like, find his hope, find his hope. So I asked him a series of questions to like figure out like what is going to be his reason to like oppose this choice towards death that he's currently trying to make. And so like I was asking about his friends and his parents and his and then he just ends up sharing these heartbreaking like his heartbreaking reality of abuse at home and like just friends like that had rejected him and a friend that like his best friend had cheated on his girlfriend with him, like, and it was just so heartbreaking. And he's sharing all this, and I'm like, Lord, where is this hope? And I noticed like he has one hand holding onto me with like an iron grip, and the other hand he was playing with something. And I looked down, and he's playing with a guitar pick. And I asked
Mm.
him, I was like, hey, like, do you play music? And he's like, yeah. And then I was like, don't you think people would want to hear your music? And it was like, it was as if everything shifted in the atmosphere. Like, here was this moment where he is, he was very seriously about to jump off. And then he looks at me, and so after a few moments of silence, he's like, yes, I do think so. And we end up like climbing off the bridge, and then he gives his life to Jesus, and he now leads like worship at his church. And
Wow.
it's just such a
So
story of
cool.
redemption. And it's like this I call this like the ministry of presence, but like being with people when they're going through hard things and helping people find their hope. It might not be a guitar pick, but it's like, what is it? Like God has predestined us for good works. What is the thing that is is so unique on someone's life, and how can we help guide them towards it and remind them like, hey, this is, I share another story later about my mom going through breast cancer, and she gives us a stone, and she tells us like, I want you to hold this stone, and I want you to think of your one thing that is your non-negotiable in your life, like the one thing that you're like, if I'm 70, I look back on my life and I did that one thing, what would it be? And so my sisters and I share like what's our one thing, and I still have that rock today, and I like hold that rock, and
Mm.
it's like kind of like my guitar pick. It's like my little physical item of something that reminds me like God wants me to do something on this earth while in this moment in this lifetime that feels like just a breath. He wants me to do something for his glory and something for the kingdom.
Mm. Yeah. When I read that story, I love how God prompted you to say, help him find his hope, right? Because that's what's going to help him not want to take his life. And when you started to ask about his parents and then it was so traumatic, I was like, oh my goodness, at that point it's like making him want to
Mm,
jump more. And I love how God just find his hope. And then you saw the guitar pick. And it's just a beautiful story.
mm,
Now he leads worship at church. It's like you led him to Jesus. And so it's just powerful. And you know what? A lot of people would say, I don't have the courage to go do that, to go sit on a bridge with someone.
mm,
What if something happens? And the what ifs, but you said, nope, I'm going to do it. And you have a mantra. I don't know if that's the right word, but you call it find the one, where you every day ask God to help you find the one that He wants you to minister to that day. I don't know if that was something you prayed before that day with the man on the bridge, but you have story after story in the book. I'm one of my other favorites is the one on the beach. I'll let people get the book to read it, but you save someone's life again. But you are just powerful stories, and I think there's something about being willing, right, to say, God, send me, like in the
mm,
Bible, I'm willing, send me, and that saying, find the one. It's kind of like this surrender of I'm ready to be used however you want me to use. Who's the person I'm supposed to bless today with your message? Or tell me about this mantra. I just love it, and it
mm.
kind of goes with the title of your book, 3 Seconds of Courage, because you do courage 3, 2, 1, right? Like kind of share a little bit
Hmm.
about those two things, and then I got one more question to wrap us up at the end.
Yeah, so I remember I had moved from New Zealand to America, and I go to a whole new country that I don't know really anything. I'm like, I don't even know how to drive on the other side of the road. What is the social security number? I had left, and in New Zealand, I had like a very just like amazing community, and here I am in a country where I don't know anyone. And one day I'm like walking through a park, and I end up like chatting with this man that was experiencing homelessness, and he was like such a blessing to me. He was like, "How are you doing?" He ended up asking me, he's like, "How are you really doing?" And it was like, here I am just sitting with this man in a park bench, and I said, "I'm sad." And he said, "Well, the cure to sadness is to help someone." And I just thought that was
Mm.
just such a remarkable moment. And so it kind of led to this idea of like finding the one. And I just because I have so much passion to like help people, but I needed it to be like measurable. And so just thinking about what would it look like if every single day I like the Lord guided me to love one person well. Like, wouldn't that be incredible to like if if you're on earth for so many more years, you look back, that's thousands of people's lives. That's huge. But like making that goal. And so I pray in the morning. I wake up and I'm like, Lord, guide me to the one. Like, who is the one today? And sometimes it might just be my husband, or sometimes it's a friend that's going through something really hard, or but sometimes it's somebody that requires like a little more courage on my end. It's walking to a coffee shop, pausing and taking that moment and being like, Lord, is the one in this room right now? And like seeing a
Mm.
lady that looks really lonely or looks really sad, and you just see it on her face, and you go up to her and you're like, hey, like, how's your day been? And just strike up a conversation. Or, hey, I love your lipstick, it looks so nice on you, and give her a compliment. And then maybe if you have the courage to, like, pray for her at the end, or like tell her about the Lord's love for her. But it's been this small decision every day that has exponentially like grown my life, grown my character, grown my love for the Lord, that I would just love to see people live into.
I just love that. Well, and you know what? I think what's I love about it even more is it just allows God to have these divine appointments that he orchestrates them and you're just the willing servant to meet up with them. And I do the same thing, like I'm in the grocery store and I have no problem chatting up with a stranger. I feel like we have a lot in common. And like on airplanes, I'm constantly like talking to people like, God, who's the person you're going to have sit next to me? Because this is like any person in the world you could put on the plane next to me, and hearing their stories and just sharing my story and encouraging them and listening to them, and sometimes tell them about Jesus, but a lot of times just saying, I'm here to pray for you or listen, or, offer my message of hope to them, because my message is, I've been through a lot of hard things. Not only did I go through a divorce, but I lost my dear friend to cancer. And so I can enter into people's pain. I think you
Mm,
said one of the gifts that you through everything was your level of empathy went up as you went through this hard crisis
mm-hmm,
in your life. And I feel like that is like one of the biggest gifts that came from my heartbreaks is my empathy radar is so high now. I not only can see others hurting, but I know how to enter into it, and not just, sometimes people want to share and people don't know what to say. So they don't ask because they're like, well, what if they
mm-hmm,
say something and I don't know how to respond? But it's like, you don't have to have the answers. You just have to give that, like you said, the
mm-hmm,
ministry of presence and be there for them. And just, oh yeah, I just think it's so amazing. And so your book, you just have one amazing story after another. I just think that is so cool,
mm-hmm,
Riley, how you are just living your life. You've let go of the fear. I mean, you really did have a traumatic event happen in your childhood. And instead of that becoming this negative, you have really turned it into the thing that has fueled you to now face your fears, live with courage. Your 3 seconds of courage. I love this. You talk about the dash between your, like on a tombstone, the day you're born and the day you die, and that dash. And I've heard this before in other books, and every time I hear it, I just think it's so powerful because like that is your life. Like, what are you going to be remembered for? And hopefully, it's
mm-hmm,
not, that you just selfishly did stuff for yourself, or even that you just live with the fears and you never face it. But hopefully, it's you took what happened to you, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, and you said, God, this isn't maybe what I wanted for my life, but I'm still going to use it and I'm going to still have others help me. And that was a really powerful thing in your book as well. So I just loved your book. Now, my favorite question to ask, because I love to read, as you can see, all the books behind me. What are some books that have impacted your life, Riley? Are you a reader?
mm-hmm. Oh, I'm such a reader. I love
Okay.
books.
So it's a hard question for
um,
readers. So maybe like your top three or whatever. I mean, I know your face is like, well, how do I pick it? But how just what your best choices? It could be three, five, whatever, but just some books that have really made an impact on your life and have been
mhm,
life changing. Obviously, besides the Bible, the Bible's the most life changing, but what other books?
mhm. Yeah, I was that kid that would like sleep with her Bible at nighttime.
I love that.
But I would say Life of the Beloved by Henry Nouwen. And he teaches you
Mm,
that your identity is not on what you produce or achieve or what you do, but on simply being a beloved child of God. Emotionally Healthy Leader by Pete Scazzero. If
mm.
you haven't, have you read that book?
I have it and I haven't read it, but I'm going to have to
You
move it to the top of
have
this.
to read it because
Yes, I've
he
heard
gives
nothing
you
but
like
good things about it.
he gives you so many good practical advice of like, hey, like we can be like spiritually healthy leaders, but what does it also look like to be like emotionally healthy leaders?
Hmm.
And he gives you like practices that you can live into. I love that book. And he talks so much about like what does our inside world look like? And then once that is healthier, then our outside world is going to be so much better.
I think his
And
wife
then
wrote, real quick, I think his wife wrote a book about emotionally healthy woman. Have you read that one too? I think
no,
there's like a,
I haven't read that one, but they've written
okay.
both of them have written
Yeah,
so
they're
many
both
books.
amazing. Okay, keep going. I just thought I'd check. Okay, what else? I love all your
And
ideas.
then there is another book called Big Magic. It's the lady, I've totally forgotten her name, but it's the lady that wrote Eat, Pray, Love. And
Okay.
that's a great book for anyone that's listening that's like a creative and wants to like figure out how to, you have this creative project, whether it's painting or art or book, and then she helps you figure out how to like join God in creating something. Um,
Mm,
but yeah, those are my top like few that I think of right now. But
I love them.
I love books.
I can tell. I love that so much. Well, I have a book I want to tell you about because I know you love the emotional stuff. Have you read the How We Love, either How We Love Our Kids or just the How We Love? Have you heard of those?
No,
By Mylin
no.
and Kay Yurkovich. So it's again, it's all about well, there's one that's like a marriage one that's a parenting one. And it's just again all about working on the inside, like working on you and learning because we all have things that happen from our
Mhm,
childhood. No parent was perfect, even though we had great parents,
mhm.
and just learning about things that then so we don't bring them into our marriage or into our parenting. I'm not doing it justice. It's really good. It's one of my life-changing books. When people ask me, that's I think I loved the parenting one, How We Love Our Kids. And if I hear correctly, you're having a baby. Is
Ooh.
that correct?
Yes, I am due in 4 days.
What? That's exciting. Congratulations. Oh, I just love that so much. And this is your first baby.
Yeah, first little girl.
Oh, Riley, that makes me
And
so happy.
we found out we were pregnant in Uganda because my husband and I last year we were traveling as missionaries for 10 months, and then we were in Uganda and we found out, we were like, whoa, this is so exciting. So it was like an epic. I mean, her journey so far, she's been chilling in my womb while this book has launched into the world, while we were like preaching the gospel in the slums in East Africa, and then here
I
we are in
love it.
Franklin, Tennessee.
I love it. You know what? Your parents did a really great job. I'm going to give a shout out to your mom and dad of just you went all over the world as a child. And when you went to go places, you did vacation, but you served first. Each time it looks like you went
Yes.
somewhere and you served and then you went and enjoyed the beautiful country and had a little vacation time. But it's just a beautiful way. I don't know. I was really impressed with them. So just let them know as a fellow mother, I was like, wow, these are so great. And I know you're going to be an amazing mom too. And oh, your book is so great, Riley. And I have to say, you guys, this you got to read it. It's called 3 Seconds of Courage, and the subtitle is How Small Acts of Bravery Lead to Big Changes. And it's just one amazing story after another. I could not put it down. My husband came upstairs. He's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I can't put this book down. It's so good." So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I just really appreciate your vulnerability.
Thank you, Jody. It's been a delight.